Okay, so GrantVantage user training, Jesse and I put this together so that we could provide new users with an overview of what GrantVantage looks like and some of the different pieces of GrantVantage that you'll be needing to get familiar with. Sorry about that. So we're going to cover the home page, dashboard. That's where your project will be located. We'll go into your projects. Jesse will cover the financial related budget transactions requests. And then we'll move to budget revisions, change requests, talk about licenses, and then we'll have questions at the end. If you have a question throughout the meeting, go ahead and ask. Don't be afraid. We'll answer questions throughout. And if you're not familiar with WebEx, there's a question and answer and chat function right here. Please just type in your questions throughout the meeting. We want everyone to be muted, and then as you answer your questions, we'll respond, and then we'll have questions at the end. So I want to show you this here. This is the CBA, Nebraska Crime Commission CBA homepage. There's some GrantVantage resources right here. Share my screen. Sorry about that. Okay, there's some GrantVantage resources right here. These are different training videos that discuss going through revision drafts, disbursements, communications. So you guys will have that to look back on. The formatting is a little different than what we have today because they didn't update, but overall it is the same concept. So with that, we'll jump right into GrantVantage. So this is the GrantVantage homepage, or dashboard, as some of us call it. You're going to have your list of projects or projects over here. This little menu you don't necessarily need. It's more so for the administrators or us. So if you want, you can collapse that, because all your projects are going to be listed right here. You can look them up by program or project. Program just separates it into if you have different funding sources there. So looking at the 2020 grant, training grant, if you single click, it will not go into your project. It'll just bring up this, I call it dynamic dashboard, which gives you a snapshot of your budget. So it's going to be a double click. So this is going to bring you to your project homepage, where you see the different details of your grant. So here we have grant details, fiscal year, issue date, your agency name, like you would see on an application page, I guess. So it's going to be the budget period. Many different grant users, project budget years. Really what you're going to be going into is the related tab. And with that, I will hand it over to Jessica, and she will discuss the related tab. I'm going to stop sharing.
All right, good morning, everyone. Let me get my screen shared here. Okay, so the related tab is really everything that you're going to need for your financials on GrantVantage. So here you have the budgeting, the drawdowns and disbursements, the reports, and the communication tab. That's pretty much what you guys use to manage your grant on here. If you go into budgeting, you just single click on everything in there. It'll pull up your actual budget, and we're using a training budget here. So it shows your project total. See if I can make this. It shows your project total, the project start and end date, status is active. Here, if you expand all, you can see your actual budget. This is put in straight from your approved application with any contingencies, extensions, whatnot. Line item by line item. Here you have what we call the parent categories. This is going to be your subawards if you have any, your county and tribe expenses. Like I said, line item by line item. So when you go in here to add transactions, what you'll do is you will right-click on the amount of the line item you want to add a transaction into, and then you can see that you can add a new transaction or you can view all transactions. So first we will add a new transaction. When you open this up, you'll see that there's two parts to it. There's the top part, the transaction details, and then kind of the lower part here, the transaction allocations. So here you'll just start with anything that you need to fill in. So the posted date is always going to be today's date, the date that you're posting the transaction. And then the transaction date, I do have some people that are pretty specific and put when the actual, when the, not invoice happened, but when the event happened. So either the pay date or whatever, but you really can just default to the last day of the month, whichever period you're doing. So I'll put the 31st just as an example. You'll put the vendor, you'll put your county, tribe, or project in there. And then when you do that, you'll find in this drop down for the contact that everyone that's on the grant drops down as a vendor contact, and you can just select yourself. This fills in here the transaction allocation, whichever line item that you select to add the transaction, it populates for you. And then, so you don't need to add in, you don't need to change anything in here. And then you just put in the amount of your transaction. So you can see if we put in, for example, $2,000, it populates down here and then it changes from the budgeted amount. It'll show you what the new balance is. So you want to keep an eye on this right here and make sure that you're not going over the budgeted line item amount. And then once you do that, you put in the memo line. This is your memo. This is your invoice to the Crime Commission. So I just like to go in order. So invoice number 1 and then the date range. So for this example, we'll just put July 1st through July 31st. And then you can save and close. And then if you go back in and view all transactions, and you click here next to the full budgeted year actual amount, if you just click next to it, it drops down here the details of all the transactions. So I had already entered in an example transaction, and then this is the one we just did. Until you request a drawdown, you can go in and edit. You can do that by just double clicking next to it in the line item. And it'll pop it back open. And if you forgot to, I don't know, put in your vendor, or if you got the dates mixed up, the posted date and the transaction date, you can go in and enter and then just save and close again. There's another place that you can edit, and I'll show you that in a minute. But this is kind of, that's the long and the short of entering transactions. It's pretty simple. You'll get used to it pretty quickly. The budget doesn't draw down in real time. This is the budgeted amount. So when you put in transactions, this total here on the budget does not change. It always stays the original budgeted amount unless you go in and do a budget revision or a budget change request, in which case that will update the budget. But as you put in transactions, this doesn't draw down. You have to keep that in mind, that that's not what that's used for. So once you enter your transactions, the next thing that I always want people to do is go into your reports here. If you go into your reports, it starts with the transaction report, which is the report that you guys will use the most. And then it always populates the report start date and end date as the beginning and end of the grant. You can change those dates if you want to isolate a certain month. I always think it's kind of helpful to see everything stacked out transaction by transaction. So I always kind of leave it the full amount. But when you get towards the end of the grant, especially if you have a lot of transactions, it can be a lot to look at. So sometimes you just want to isolate it. But here, if you expand all, you can see you have 9 transactions entered. You expand all, it starts here with the sources. This is just the funding amount. And then as you scroll down, you can see each parent category with each line item listed. And you can see that the transactions that you've entered are entered line item by line item here with the total remaining. So this green number right here is how much is remaining after we added those 2 transactions. Here's the total that was the original total of the budgeted line item. Here's what's left after those transactions have been entered. So you keep an eye on that number. So I want you to go through here and look at these before you submit your drawdown request. And the reason that I want you to do that, and I have an example, because if you go over a budgeted line item amount, as you scroll through, it's really easy to tell if something's over because it shows here as in red. The difference is in red. That means you're over by $1 in this example, however much it would be, but you're over. And so before you request the drawdown, you can still go in and edit that amount. Once you request a drawdown, you can't. It locks the transactions in, and you can't edit them. So at that point, if you send it to me, then I have to email you back and say this is over the budgeted line item and we need it corrected, and then I have to wait for that to come back and then we have to fix it. So it's just a lot quicker if you go through and make sure that everything is within the budgeted line item amount before you request it and send it to me or whoever you're sending it to. In this case, it's just I put it as $1 over, and so you can double click right there within this report on the line item, and you can pop it open just like we did on the budget tab, and you can change the amount. So I guess here I'll pause and say there's 2 ways to fix this if it's over the budgeted amount. The first way is to just decrease the requested amount. And then save and close it. And then if you refresh right here, and expand again, and then scroll down, you'll see that it's no longer over the budgeted amount. So this would be ready to be processed. You could send this to me and I would be able to pay it. The other way is with a budget change request, which I'll cover in just a minute. So we'll come back to that, but that's the first way that you can change it. So after you have all your transactions entered in and you have checked them all over and they're all correct and you're ready to request a drawdown, you go down to drawdown and disbursements. And there, you click the blue arrow and then you click in that line item and it'll open it up. If you have any requests, it'll show them in order of how they were requested on down, but we don't have any in here. So I'll just show you. So you'll go ahead and click the plus and add one. And then the payment request date, again, is always today's date. So it'll be the 29th as of today, but the period start date and end date are going to be July 1st through July 31st in this example, which wouldn't be true because you wouldn't be requesting on the 29th for the month that hasn't ended yet, but just for this example, we'll do this. So when you do this, it pulls in everything, all the transactions that we've entered within this date range, and this is this total. You don't have to add anything up. GrantVantage does it for you. The only thing you have to change is requested, and then you can look at your transactions and make sure that everything looks correct. And then in the memo line, again, we want it to be the same so that it's easy to track. And then once you do that, you save and close. And it'll pop you back out. It shows you all your line items that you've entered. And then right here under document link, you generate request. And sometimes that takes a minute. So I'm going to close mine and get into another one just because for training purposes, I don't want to keep you on the line. Okay, so now you can see that this has been requested. And what you'll do after that, GrantVantage doesn't send any notifications to any of us that something has been completed in GrantVantage unless you send it. So you'll go to your communication tab and you'll just click new message. And of course, this will say your name instead of mine, but then the two, you can send that right to me. If I'm your contact, if your contact is someone else, you'll send it to them. You can just put July payment request or whatever makes sense to you. And then the message can be as simple as July transactions and drawdown submitted or something like that. And then you scroll down here and you click send. That links to my Outlook and it'll send me a message saying I have something to look at in GrantVantage, and then I'll go in and I'll read your message and I will go in and complete the payment. I always respond back. I say that it was approved, it was processed, or if there was an issue or if I had a question, I'll always respond through there. And you'll get the same message that you have a message from me in GrantVantage that you need to go in and look at, and that's where you'll find it right there on the communication tab. And I prefer all communication about GrantVantage to go through GrantVantage just so that it's kind of kept in the same area. So then the next thing I'd like to go back and talk about is the budget change requests or budget revisions that I was talking about. So that invoice that was over by $1, I did correct it by just editing the amount, but the other way to correct that would be to request that we move money from a different line item that perhaps you have extra money in that you're not going to spend into that line item to cover that overage. And where you do that is you go to the budgeting again, budgeting right here, and then you, right here, this little settings cog, you'll open that up and you can request budget change. And then it pops this box open. On this box, this is where you put your, where you want to move the money from and where you want to move the money to. So when you do that, so we'll just pick as an example, we'll go from this program coordinator position to, let's say, educational material. So it shows this current amount, and then you want to put in what your new amount is going to be But something you really have to watch closely once you have transactions entered in is this current amount does not account for any transactions that have been entered. We wish that was different. We put in a request, but as of yet, it does not reflect anything that you've already entered and been paid out for. So you have to keep in mind and go back and really keep an eye on your budgeted line items to see what the amount is. So you may have $3,000 taken out of here. So the total is not $7,000 anymore, but $4,000, and you want to move $1,000. So it would be $3,000 would be the new amount. It wouldn't be $6,000. And I know that's kind of confusing. And if it's a lot of you, especially on the CBA, have done this a number of times and know exactly what you're doing. If you're newer to this, I don't mind at all walking you through the first couple times. It is kind of tricky, that amount. Or maybe it's not, maybe it's really simple, and I just think it's kind of tricky the first couple times. So definitely reach out if you have any questions. It always wants a title. This is just something that if you were to run a report to see all your change requests, something that would kind of stick in your memory as something that you could pull that and take a look if you needed to. So it can be as simple as, you know, coordinator. I don't get too hung up on what you put in this title. The justification needs to be, if anyone is familiar with the old subgrant adjustments, it's basically just the narrative that we always ask of you. So it's just why you're requesting the change. When you send the communication telling us that you've completed a change request, it needs to go to both Trent and I. Trent is responsible for the programming side of everything. So if you're moving things from one program to another, he has to look this over and approve it before I can approve the budget. And so this justification, if you are detailed enough, he more than likely wouldn't have to reach back out to you for extra information. If it's too simple, he may need to. So since this is going to both Trent and I, it needs to be at least detailed enough that we can both look at it and glean from it what we need. If we don't, obviously, we will reach out to you and ask questions, but it's easier to just put all the information that's needed here. So when you do this change, again, I'll use the example that it would be 3,000 left. So when you take it out, before you put it in the other category, you can see there's a balance here of $4,000. So obviously you have to add that to there because that balance amount needs to be zero. Before you save and close, it needs to be a zero balance. You have to, however much you take, you have to put in an equal amount. It seems pretty easy with just one or two, but then we get some pretty complicated ones sometimes where if you add and you have to come from three different areas, three different line items into an area, a line item rather, if sometimes you have to put it into two different categories, you really have to watch that balance amount and make sure it's zero before you submit it. The other thing that I'll say that you have to watch out for, and this is a pretty common error that I see, when you put in a line item here, if you need to use it more than once, so I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this. If you need to use it more than once, you need to do it all in one request. So if you're taking money from one line item and you're putting it into a couple different line items, you need to do it either in one request, otherwise you have to do one request, alert me that I can go in and approve it, and then do another one. Because if you do multiple requests from the same line item, this current amount will not update until I approve it. So I've had people that have put in multiple requests on different requests, so not just on one, and they'll have the same line item in a couple ones, and that'll throw the whole budget out of whack. And then I have to go in and do a revision and kind of find where to put the money back if it gets approved without noticing. So just make sure that if you have a line item that you're splitting into a couple different categories, you try to do it all in one change request. And again, that's kind of complicated in theory and maybe easier to walk you through when we have a real life example. So if you get to a point that you have that, don't hesitate to reach out and I can help walk you through that. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is these parent categories, This total here on the line item, it's not an actual line item. That's what I mean to say. It's a parent category, so it's more of like the title. So this is the county and tribe expenses. This total here is the total of all these line items underneath it. So another thing that we wish GrantVantage would allow us to do is kind of block this amount out, because we don't want you drawing and putting any transactions on this total amount, but it will let you. So if you right click on that amount, oh, well, now it's not letting me, but it typically will let you move money to or from this. Maybe you can't add a transaction. Maybe it's only in the request change. You can put this as an option, but it's not really an option because it's just the total of all the line items underneath it. So you don't want to do anything with this amount. These line items feed that. So make sure that you're not using that for any change requests or transactions. And then I mentioned that, yeah, you can edit everything. Every transaction that you enter until you request it. Once you request it, it locks it down. In the drawdown and disbursements, only Trent and I can delete anything. So if you add something in error, there's no way for you to delete it. You have to reach out and have us delete it. So if you have, that's why it's so important for you to go in and look at the reports, the transaction report before you request the drawdown, because once you request the drawdown, it's really locked in, and then we have to go in and delete it. That's not a problem, but it's an extra step that you know, can skip if you go in and check your reports before you submit anything. And then there's a budget revision I wanted to cover too. So if you have any line items that need added, or if there's any change request that's maybe too complicated to just do in that box that we were just in on the budgeting tab, if there's anything more complicated that you don't want to do in that, or if you need to add a line item, you need to reach out to me, and I will help you with that. I'll work with Trent, and he'll look over the programming part of it and make sure that it's an approved change. Once we get the okay from Trent, I can move on and help you with the budget revision. When we create a budget revision, it opens up the entire budget for editing, which means you can delete line items, you can move all the money around in every category without approval. So I keep that locked, and that's something that I will help you with. So if you have something that you need to do that requires a budget revision, just reach out to me and I'll help you with that. And with that, I think that I will hand it back over to Trent. He's going to talk about licensing.
So the only thing that I would like to add to the transactions is if you're a JS subrecipient, you need to upload a general ledger of expenses to the transactions.
Oh, thank you.
Your quarterly drawdowns.
Thank you. And I'm going to jump back in here just for a second. I did forget to add that. So especially with the risk assessment that we just did, some people have already, with the CBA anyway, have been uploading all their transactions or all their invoices anyway, but some people haven't and now need to start. So some people do know how to do that and some people don't. So really quickly, if we add a transaction, once you fill all of this in, if you look right here, there's a tab for attachments. So you'll want to have your invoices scanned and uploaded to your computer where you can pull from. And it's pretty simple. You just click the add attachment, you choose file. I have kind of a dummy one here ready to go just for training. So you just attach it, you open it, you save it. And then once it's saved, it's attached to that. And I will show you what that looks like. If you look at the reports, I think is a good place to see what you have attached and what you don't. So next to here, if there's this little green paper clip with a number, that means there's an attachment on that. And so depending on what your risk assessment was, you will have attachments that you'll need to upload on there, and that's how you do that. Thank you, Trent. I had that written down and I forgot to say that.
Yeah, no problem. So the only thing that I have for licenses is if you have a change in a user within your agency needing a license, you'll have to reach out to us and have that change done. CBA licenses will go through Jessica, and JS licenses will go through me. So that's it on that. Does anyone have any questions?
And that goes for password resets as well. If you have a password reset, if you don't log into GrantVantage for, I think it's 30 days, which all of you should be logging in every 30 days, but if you don't log in for 30 days, it will, you'll have to reset your password. I think it's 30 days anyway. You'll have to reset your password, and you can reach out to, again, me if you're CBA or Trent if you're JS, and we can get that process started for you.
And there is a user guide. I would just have to find it. So if you'd like a user guide, send me an email or Jessica, and we can get that out to you. Anything else? Oh, looks like we got one more. Rochelle, that will go to Jesse.
Okay, I'm just getting to the questions. Okay, so I have a question. Can a transaction be deleted by the grantees before the drawdown? No, you cannot delete anything. You can edit, you can't delete. So if you add a transaction that you need to just delete entirely, if it's a duplicate or whatever, and you don't want to edit it, you need to delete it, you can just reach out to me and just tell me which line item, which amount, which date, and I'll go in and delete that for you.
So I have a question. Are drawdowns submitted quarterly or monthly? So CBA drawdowns are submitted monthly. JS drawdowns are submitted quarterly. However, JS can submit monthly if they would like to. Give a few more minutes, see if there's any more questions. So Jesse, this one might be better for you to respond. I'll read it though. If something is not correct, do you return?
Yeah, I mean, if something is not correct, do I return? I guess I maybe need more information on that. If it's something that isn't correct for me, like the budgeted, if it's over a budgeted line item amount, if, let's see, if it's on that top portion of a transaction, if you forget your vendor or vendor contact, if the invoice number isn't correct, I will probably, at least in the beginning, and everybody that has been with me on CBA kind of knows, I'll correct it for you. Sometimes it's just as easy for me to just go through real quickly and do that the first couple of times. If it continues to be an issue, I will definitely let you know that you need to start filling that out completely. If that's not what you mean, I need more details, But I guess the answer is sometimes I'll return it. Sometimes I'll just correct it. What I won't do is I won't change the numbers. I won't add a transaction. I won't do anything with the editing of the amounts or anything like that. If it's something on the side of just what I use, invoice number, vendor contact, things like that, I feel comfortable being able to edit those for you. I just won't do anything with the amounts ever.
Another one for you, Jesse. Can the activity and drawdown invoice number be the same? And can multiple activities under one invoice have the same invoice number?
Yeah, so the invoice number, I don't know. I try to explain this to a lot of times, and I don't know that I am exactly clear. So the memo line, the invoice number is your invoice to me at the Crime Commission. So what I want it to be is I want it to be consecutive. So if we start, so on August, this is for CBA reporting monthly, on August 14th or 15th rather, all the transactions in drawdown are due for July expenses, right? So all the date ranges will be 7/1 to 7/31, and all the transactions should all be invoice number 1. And then the next month, in theory, the next month should be number 2, 8/1 through 8/31, and then the next one for September would be invoice number 3, 9/1 through 9/30. The caveat to that is occasionally we get late invoices, and that just happens, in which case the date range will be the same. But the invoice number, you've already used invoice number 1, for example. So if you get a July invoice from one of your programs or vendors that was back in July is when you purchased it, but you don't get invoiced until after the 15th of the next month, so it's past when you already requested for that month, you'll still put it in as that date range because that's the month that it occurred, which is where you put the invoices. But you'll put the next consecutive invoice number. So if it's in September and you've already requested September, so you've already used invoice number 1, invoice number 2, invoice number 3, it'll be invoice number 4, but the date range will still be 7/1 through 7/30. And again, I know that sounds complicated, but once you get kind of in and doing it, I think that it becomes clearer. So long answer longer. Yes, all the transactions in July, as long as they're not late and done months later, should all have the same invoice number. And the next month, it'll be the next invoice number consecutively, whatever the next one is. And all those transactions will also have the same invoice number. Does that kind of make sense? Hopefully.
And if you guys have any more questions on reporting transactions, anything, you can email Jesse or I to set up a time and just kind of go through GrantVantage. We don't expect you to get it all right now.
No, absolutely.
And you don't know it like we do. So, Jesse, got another one. Can a supplementary invoice number 1A? I'm not sure what that means.
No, I'm not seeing all the questions. Some of the ones you're saying I'm not seeing, but then I am seeing some, and I don't know why that is. So if I'm missing someone's question, I may not be seeing it.
For end-of-year reporting, is there additional steps to close the grant?
Yes. So at the end of the grant, which we're in right now, we give you additional time just for those late invoices that sometimes roll through. So we give you 45 days after the close of the grant. So the grant ended on July 31st. The 2019 grant ended on July 31st. But we won't close the grant until August 14th. That's 45 days after the close of the grant. So what you need to do, and I sent it out to everybody on CBA. This is just CBA that I've sent out to. Everyone on CBA was sent out a de-obligation letter and a reminder of that date, the date of August 14th, which is the close of the grant. So You will look in GrantVantage once you have all your transactions in, and some people already have, some people are already closed out, some people are in the process of closing out, some people are waiting on a couple more invoices. But when you are for sure that your invoices are all in and accounted for, if there is unspent funds, then that is what you will deobligate back to the Crime Commission. This year we did have that extension. You will still put that amount in the deobligation letter, and there's a spot for it. Unspent funds, extended funds, total deobligation. I know that's kind of confusing, but even if we've extended it, we still have to close out the 2019. So we're having you deobligate it, and then we just put it back into your budget for the 2020, but you still have to deobligate the total. That's it, though. That's all you have to do. The rest of it is all on our end. We will close out the GrantVantage portion of it. You just need to make sure that you use the total, that your total matches the GrantVantage total. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me and I can go over that with you. But yeah, that's how we close them out. You just, the deobligation letter, if you have spent all your funds, then that's it. You're done. There's nothing additional you have to do.
Okay, if you have a second invoice for reporting month, example July, can you do invoice 1A rather than doing invoice number 2, which would be for the next month? That keeps all of month number 1 invoices tagged with the same number, but the A lets you know it's a second invoice for the first month.
Yep, I just saw that one. So, I mean, I guess that's a good idea. We haven't been doing that thus far. So I think that we will just keep it the consecutive number of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, rather than putting in letters, just because that's how we've been doing it for the last year. But it's not a bad idea. But I think it's just as easy to just use the next consecutive number.
Okay, well, that looks like that's all there is for questions. So we will wrap up this meeting. I want to thank everyone for joining and being patient with the technical difficulties. If you have any questions, again, you can reach out to Jesse or myself. And have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.